everybody. My name is Tanya Day, and I am at the Orange County Historical Museum, and I am stepping in for Annie at the Alliance. And I have to admit, this is my first time using the Zoom webinar function, so I'm not sure if you were able to see Tom and I struggling to get the presentation up and running and perfect and working for y'all. So I do apologize if you saw us struggling, but there's a behind the scenes moment for y'all. So welcome. I believe everybody is able to see me right now and that I don't have to admit you and such. If somebody would please pop into the chat box, yes, I can hear you. I would really appreciate that, just to make sure that we are up and running and this is actually working. Or perhaps send a question, because again, this is my first time using the webinar function. Or somebody can raise their hand if they'd like. Just to let me, oh, fantastic, I'm seeing some hands. Thank you, and welcome. Fantastic. All right, let's get officially started. Again, my name is Tanya Day at the Orange County Historical Museum. I'm stepping in for Annie for this Alliance Lunch and Learn, and we are so honored to have Tom Magnuson with us today. Now, most of you probably already are acquainted with Tom, but for those of you that are not, I do have an official biography for the illustrious Tom Magnuson. So he was born and raised in Minnesota and entered the Merchant Marines while still in high school. And during the summers, he worked on river and lake craft. After high school, he became a blue water seaman for a year before trying college, but he wasn't quite ready for it yet. So he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, and after 4 years with the Marine Corps, married and returned to college. He earned both his bachelor's and master's in American history, while at the same time employed as a research specialist in the integrated circuit industry. Later, he was employed by the U.S. Navy Special Projects Office, and the Navy actually specially sent him to the Naval Postgraduate School, and faculty there convinced him to continue his research after completing his course of study. In 1978, he did move to North Carolina to study and work with the great military historian Theodore Ropp at Duke University. What started as an interest in North Carolina's culture and history eventually took over his life and led to the creation of the Trading Path Association in 1999, which sought to preserve the vestiges of the wonderful history threatened by urban sprawl. And today, Tom will be taking us through a narrated slideshow specifically about the 1733 Moseley map of North Carolina. There's quite an interesting peculiarity with this map and other recorded research about roads in this area. So I'm quite interested myself to learn what Tom has uncovered, and I will let him take it away. If we have time for questions at the end, feel free to pop them into the box and I can read them out to Tom, and hopefully we can have a neat discussion with that. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you, Tom, on behalf of the Alliance and the museum and the entire community. And I will now mute myself and let you get to work.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for attending. I began working on this project, the current project, based on Moseley's map in 2017. Two very senior historians in North Carolina wrote a book that year, reviewing North Carolina's history, and claimed that it was the only colony of the first 13 that didn't have a founder's story. And I knew that to be just wrong. I set out to prove it was just wrong. And this is the third in a series of 4 presentations. In the first one, I presented evidence that there was a longstanding commercial trade in the North Carolina Sounds, replenishing food and water for people that were raiding the Spanish Main, explorers, privateers, and pirates. And the second presentation, I talked about North Carolina's first permanent settlement, which was created in the 1650s by religious refugees hiding from the governments of Maryland and Virginia. And they had a great relationship with their neighbors. They, in fact, got visited by Henry Fox, or George Fox, the founder of Friends Society, in 1672, and he said they're godly people and they're doing it right. And they after he left, many of them considered themselves Quakers, and the Albemarle district on the north shore of Albemarle Sound quickly sprouted Quaker meetings. That was the second presentation. This presentation is about a road on Mosley's map that nobody noticed was a road. Their assumption was that it was a trail. But I'll show you the reasons why I think that's wrong and why it's so important. This is the oldest road, I think, in Carolina, perhaps. The Albemarle district had a bunch of roads by the time this road got built. But this is, you'll see here in a second. Let's see what happens. Oh dear. Oh, there we go. These are the texts that are kind of important to this presentation. Larry Babbitts did a paper where he went to the British Archives and dug out the receipts that Cornwallis's officers handed out when they confiscated property during his 1781 visit to North Carolina. And 60% of the names that appear on those confiscation receipts don't appear in any other record. They're not on road commissions, they're not on juries, they're not in the militia. So suddenly that demonstrated that there was a tremendous invisible population in mid to late 18th century North Carolina. That was tantalizing. The next book down here, by the way, is a large tome. William Cummings' Southeast and Early Maps has all the maps that represent North Carolina in it, and with short essays about each. And I read his essay on the Mosley map, and there was no mention of this road, nor was there a mention of the artifacts in the sounds that captured my interest there. Rebecca Dobbs, this is not in any particular order, but Rebecca Dobbs produced a dissertation at UNC in 2007, in which she took land grants from early Carolina, the earliest land grants, and she mapped them in a GIS system, and found that these earliest land grants went mainly to Pennsylvania Quakers, and they settled all along the road that we're going to study today, which means that's probably how they got in here. The next book was Thigpen Indian Tribe. Is a family genealogy for the Thigpen family. And Thigpen was the guy that built the road. So there's very little information about him that I've been able to surface yet. Mosley's map, you're going to see plenty of that today. And then there's important, if you don't have a copy already, go to your nearest bookstore and get William S. Powell's North Carolina Gazetteer. I like the first edition because it's got the naughty words in it, but the second edition is even bigger. It's much fuller than the first, and it's place names seen on early maps, explicated by various experts. Bobby Teague's history of the Cane Creek meeting is important, and I won't touch on that very much today. Next week, I'm doing a presentation on the settlement in the backcountry, and Cane Creek plays a major role in that. The final book here, Cotters and Squatters, I accidentally stumbled over some years ago, and it explains land title claims in English shires at about the time that we're talking about here. There were a lot of rules that did not make it over the pond. And among those was your right to squat. So People wonder why we had a lot of squatters back here. They thought that eventually they'd be able to buy their land. That didn't happen. All right, so on to the original Thigpen's Trace. This is the map, Mosley's map. And in the upper right-hand corner, we'll take a close-up look at the Quaker roads south of the Dismal Swamp later on. But if you look in the middle of that map, there's only those roads in the upper right-hand corner here. And then there's a singular road that comes down like this, and it's going to Charleston. It connected the southern capital with the northern capital. Eatonton was the northern capital, Charleston was the southern capital of Carolina before it became two different colonies. And then there's this one. And this is Thigpen's Trace. And in my research, I was able to ascertain when it was built. And interestingly, I had mapped remnants of it all the way from Petersburg, Virginia to Georgia years ago, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And then all of a sudden I realized that this is a wagon road. Everybody kind of assumed that it was a trail, a pack horse trail, but in fact, it's a wagon road. These are the roads in the Albemarle Sound. They were quite well developed in 1733 or whenever this map was drawn. You may recall that John Lawson was the Surveyor General for Carolina and was executed by the Tuscarora for land theft. And after he died, he was replaced by this guy Mosley. And I think a lot of Mosley's maps were based on Lawson's work. And this particular map here certainly feels like it because Lawson lived in New Bern and mapped the Sounds very thoroughly. This is the map that the road that we're talking about. What I've done is zoomed in on it so you can see about 1700, by 1700, English map makers were using a convention to discriminate between a wagon road, a horse path, or a horse trail, or a porter path, footpath. And the symbol for wagon road was two parallel lines, like the track that the wagon makes on the ground. And that's what we have here. We have a wagon road. So I felt like I had to investigate that. And here's the timeline. Queen Anne's War was from 1702 to 1715 between England, France, and Spain. France and Spain were being beaten up by the English, and prior to 1702, the Spanish Native American allies were raiding all the way up to nearly Charleston into South Carolina, what is now South Carolina. And so as soon as we learned that there was a war on, as soon as he learned, James Moore called his militia together for training, and James Thigpen got a contract to build that road all the way from Hopewell, which was a deep water port in the Chesapeake, to the Gulf of Mexico. He undoubtedly used pre-existing indigenous trade routes. I suspect that he got that contract to build that road because he probably was a pack horse leader or a trader of some kind. Anyway, you got a contract to build the road. I haven't found the contract yet. Somebody's going to have to go to the British archives to dig that out. And he completed it in 1704. And for the next 2 years in a row, Moore led campaigns down against the French in Mobile Bay and the Spanish at St. Augustine, Papistol. And in the 1705 campaign, he just about destroyed the Appalachian people. And that was the end of the Spanish threat to Carolina. So essentially, from 1705 into 1740s, Thickman's Trace was a wonderful wagon road leading to the flower of Carolina, what Lawson described the Hoff Hills west of Hillsborough and east of the Haw River as the flower of Carolina, the finest land. And there's Magnuson's law of roads. If it exists and is not blocked, it's going to get used. And I'm convinced that immediately at the end of the Tuscarora War, 1715, or even earlier, people escaped from the Albemarle to get away from the Anglicans. These Quakers left the Albemarle and slipped into the back country using this road. And I'll show some map work that more or less shows you where at least 5 different groups were settled. All we know about Thigpen is from the family genealogy, and I came across him doing some of the most mundane history research. I went through all of the highway history signs in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And in Georgia, I came across a sign that celebrated James Thigpen's Road. Thigpen's Trace, or Thigpen's Trail, is on a Georgia historic highway sign. I got a hold of the department that mounted it, and they didn't even have a file on him. They had no idea where the information came from. But like I say, I did find the family genealogy, Thigpen's tribe, and it confirmed that he had this contract and he built that road. So he was a militia captain when he had commission for the road, and he pioneered that road. And like I said, it suggests that he had considerable backcountry travel experience in order to be selected for this job. Road building was something just about every male knew how to do. The roads were all built by militiamen, and for the most part, militiamen are substitutes, and everyone had to know how to lay a road out. If you got a road order, it was usually from point A to point B, from the courthouse to so-and-so's mill. And somebody would then lay the road out. Well, undoubtedly, the road exists previously as a trail or a footpath. And all they do is had to go through and cut the trees back and get the brush away from there. There's a law of 1555, the King's Law of the Highway, said that a road had to be 10 feet wide at the running surface and cleared 25 feet either side of the center line, and have a grade no greater than 5%. And that is a perfect description of a 17th or 18th century road. And you go out and measure them today, and they're 10 feet wide. This red clay down here holds its shape very well. I'm convinced, for good reason, that his wagon road was on top of a early commercial route, and I have seen sites up on Mount Tirzah in Person County and over in Randolph County where the wagon road has overland footpaths and horse trails that kind of squirt out from under the wagon road. All of a sudden, you see them going off on a tangent, and he probably only deviated from that old indigenous trail that had been turned into a pack horse road. The only time he deviated from it was when he came to a place that was just simply inhospitable to wagons. And the main one on this route is the Caraway Mountains. We'll get to that later. Just background information, in the earliest times, what I call the age of muscle power, when all transportation on ashore was powered by muscles. human or other. And the roads went from gap to gap, not from town to town. The most important gaps really were in the Piedmont are stream crossings. And I once counted the streams between Petersburg and North Carolina. If you take this all the way down to Georgia, there's 26 named rivers between Petersburg and South Carolina, I think. And there are 128 named watercourses in Virginia that you have to cross. Each one of them was capable of stopping you as a traveler if the river was in spate. So stream crossings were strategic choke points of the Piedmont. A day's travel, 10 to 15 miles, and that's the separation between native villages and then the earliest European hamlets and towns. And every 6 days or so, you would stop, rest your critters, repair your harness and so forth. And seventh day was a rest day. And you pick at those places where people regularly spent several days, turned into larger towns. The routes, the Native Americans were very defensive, and they were very careful not to be seen. So their footpaths were on what's called a military crest along ridges. They would get up on the ridge because nature tends to clean the ridgetop with wind and rain, and it's easier to walk than down along the creeks. And military crest is about 8 to 10 feet below the physical ridge, so that you're visible to only half the world at any given time, and you don't create a silhouette. The original pack horse roads all ran along that military crest, deviating from it only when the going got too rough. If the way down to the ford was too steep, they'd have to find a different way than the switchback trails that porters used. Almost always had a hamlet near a ford, because when waters rise, people have to park, wait for the water to go down, or they have to go upstream to a shallower ford. And in the Piedmont, most of our streams have got parallel roads on either side of the stream to get you up to the next ford if you misjudged which one to use. Part of the lure of a trucker in those days was knowing how to read the clouds. And I should not use that ford, I'll use that other ford upstream. So William Powell, the author of the Gazetteer, told me at a meeting one day after I talked about these issues that he had noticed a architectural feature on houses in the Piedmont that were near streams, and that they had a lean-to shed on the back of the house. And you could enter the shed from the outside, but you couldn't enter it from the inside, so that strangers could shelter from rain or what have you while they were waiting for the water to go down without bothering the family. Humans are by far the most agile critters when it comes to carrying junk. We only carry maybe 100, 120 pounds of junk. A horse can carry twice that much, and then you have to have one human for every 4 to 5 horses to manage them on the trail. And wagons that usually had 2 to 4 or 6 critters, oxen or eventually horses, they carry thousands of pounds. So, the per unit value of the cargo keeps going up and up. And the heavier the wagon, the more demanding the ford crossing points were. So, for example, on the Deep River, west of Randleman, the original ford of the trading path, the pack horse trail, crossed right at Randleman. But as wagons got bigger and bigger, cargoes got heavier and heavier, the principal crossing went further and further up the deep river until the ultimate crossing, which pretty well dictated where Highway 85 went, was at Jamestown, where there was a solid granite base on the river that would take any amount of weight. And by the way, I mentioned that the King's law of the highway specified a 5% grade, and that had nothing to do with climbing. It had everything to do with going downhill. You did not want to have an issue with the wagon getting away with the animals going downhill. And to this day, the U.S. Department of Transportation requires any road that has a grade greater than 5% has to be labeled as such. So when you're coming back from Asheville, you see the signs, a 6% grade ahead. There's a lot of work that goes into making and maintaining a wagon road, and it usually implies the existence of government. Only government can afford to build them, and it does so because commerce generates income for governments. And that's always the case. That is, every road is principally a commercial avenue, and only secondarily is it a convenience for you and I. And almost all cases, travel was only done in daylight hours. There are several roads that I've seen that were probably commercially very important, heavily used, and they were lined with milky quartz, so that in a low light situation, starlight, moonlight, you'd be able to see where the edge of the road was, and you could continue traveling after dark. But I'd say that's the exception and not the rule. Okay, Thigpen's trace undoubtedly sat on these pack horse routes. And in the case of the Caraway Mountains, if you're not familiar with the Caraway Mountains, you should probably be so. They're quite a phenomenal set of hills, but they just blast up out of the ground several hundred feet all of a sudden. No gentle rise, just bang, they're in your face. And the pack horse trail went through the middle of the Caraway Mountains. And the last ridge it was on is Earnhardt's Ridge, or Earnhardt Road. And it forded the Uwharrie, the Great and Small Uwharrie River fords were just about where they came together. Just upstream from their junction was where the road forded those rivers. And it goes on to become Jerusalem Road and yada yada. And it's a very interesting stretch of old pack horse road that you can see bits and pieces of it all along there. The alternative to skirting the south side of the Caraway Mountains, which I believe Thigpen probably did, is you can skirt it north as well, like I said, to that Jamestown crossing, which then leads you to a ford, a foot ford that was a little soft, but still you could get a wagon through it. That was just upstream from where Highway 61 crosses the Yadkin River now. And that then takes you down to the Catawba River. So see, these are some of the issues that are raised by the studies that I mentioned above and by the existence of this road. There is no evidence of a road order for this road. I hope somebody gets to the British archives and finds the contract, or at least a receipt for payment. We know that there were 4 Quaker place names that existed in North Carolina before they were there when the first maps were made. And these four Quaker place names, I believe, reflect location of some of these Albemarle Quakers that escaped into the back country. We know there was a large uncounted population from Babbitt's work. And in the land grants of Orange County's land grants, Hawfield land grants in the 1740s were granting barns and fences and crops and houses, two-story houses. And so they've been occupied for a long time. And like I said, Dobbs' dissertation located many of the 1740s and 50s grants along Thigpen's Trace, which parallels Highway 57 northeast of Hillsboro and comes down off Mount Tirzah and crosses at Fawcett's Mill. So here's the place names that I've located so far. Quaker Neck right here is probably a settlement made by rowing a boat up after the Tuscarora War. Some Quakers managed to get upriver and on a real good fording spot near Goldsboro and created Quaker Neck, a village, a community. The others, this being Thigpen's Trace, the Cane Creek Quakers, say that 3 times real fast, and have located themselves 1 day off of the road. Quaker Creek settlements are about a half day off of the road. Quaker Meadow is closer to a full day, and Quaker Gap is a day to a day and a half off of the road. So they're proximate to, but not on, which indicates that they were hiding. They did not want to be seen. They were off the beaten path, literally. So this is, to me, indications that these early Albemarle Quakers just went over here and got on that road and escaped from the abuses of the Anglican government. And because North Carolina history was written by Anglicans and later Episcopals, they were delegitimized. And in fact, in that book I mentioned first off that got me excited about the fact that North Carolina doesn't have a founder's story, the authors referred to the people of the Albemarle as the offscourings of Virginia and Maryland. They didn't refer to them as religious refugees. No, they were offscourings, which is a terrible canard. And I hope they live to regret it. I think sometimes oops, yeah, that's it. Does anyone have any questions? We have about 15 minutes if we want.
That was fantastic, Tom. Thank you. I'm just putting myself back. Here we go. That was really interesting. Yes, absolutely. If you have questions, please pop them in the chat box and we will get to them. I was really intrigued by this idea that you're saying, look, we know that roads had to be government mandated. It's not just because of the amount of upkeep needed, but you're right. If they're sending commerce down those roads, they want them to be upkept. They want them to be built. But it's fascinating that there has yet to be found a government mandate for this road, yet it's on the map. How? Why?
Well, and also how darn long it was, from the Chesapeake to the Gulf of Mexico is a big investment. Yeah. And they invested that to get military impedimenta, rucksacks and food and so forth, went in wagons. Guys didn't carry them. It was enough for a guy to hike 15 to 20 miles a day with a musket without carrying all that other gear. So they usually carried the tents and things like that in wagons. And that's what the road was built for, was to serve as a supply channel for the campaigns against the Appalachian Indians and the Spanish and French. Sorry,
So,
yeah.
as a main purposeful line, there would have had to be a purposeful reason for it being there. We do have Joe Cobb has put into the chat box. He says, let's go to Britain and find those records. Yes. Who volunteers? we need to get some graduate student on that.
Please.
And again,
my next presentation will be in October, and it's the fourth in the series. And the intent is to identify all of the questions that these insights have raised, and suggest all of the documents that need to be dug out somewhere. And I'm too old to do it, and frankly, I don't anticipate going to the British Archives anytime. So I hope some young person will grab a hold of this and run with it.
I think it would make a fantastic doctoral program. Maybe we can get somebody at Duke or NC State or UNC, see if anybody could be interested. We do have another question.
They have a really neat program. They have a really neat program at A&T, which combines geography and history. Go ahead.
Let's see, are there any known records, journals, or otherwise from those who may have worked on the road alongside Thigpen? That's a good point. Maybe just some regular guy keeping a journal. This is the date. This is what I did. That's quite interesting. Do you know of anything?
If they exist, I wasn't able to surface them. Generally speaking, the only journals that get kept are from high status individuals. The paper's expensive and so on and so forth. The likelihood of finding any documents would, well, literally, as it always does, will require a graduate student going in and stirring the papers up in somebody's archive. And Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina, and North Carolina all have their own archives with a lot of vertical files full of quickly jotted down notes from Billy Joe Rabob, who did something interesting in 1810. So that I look forward to having these students just kind of tear the archives up until they find the information.
Well, and especially as you said, this was not a short road. This was not an internal North Carolina road. This was a long road with a lot of work put into it. And as it goes across the country, all of those archives, whether they may be a local town or county archive or those state archives, could have that information.
That's right. You know, Orange County Library has an Orange County section, and it has vertical files that families have put their genealogies in, and they've taken journals that inherited from grandpa and put them in there. And somebody just has to go through and find those documents. And it's not going to happen in a year or two. I suggest that if I had another life to live, I'd wear it out doing that.
Well, and this is just a personal quick question as well. You mentioned that these roads would have been built, this wagon road would have been built along indigenous pathways that already existed. And I wonder what kind of relationship must have been occurring, because these pathways would still have been actively used by indigenous peoples. How did they feel about this development? What was that interaction like?
Lawson walked along this road after he got to the Catawba towns in 1701. He never mentioned that he walked on a road. Travelogues almost always emphasize the difficulties and how primitive the terrain was and so forth. And he never mentions that he was on a road, but he was on the Packhorse Road, on the very well known, very well worn Packhorse Road. And he may have, once he became the Surveyor General, he may have gone down Thigpen's Trace at least as far as the Yadkin River to get it on his maps. The Native Americans are just about gone. Lawson noted that as of 1701, fewer than 1 in 6 Native Americans survived in the Piedmont. And the Occaneechi lore has it that after the Tuscarora War, the slavers came through the Piedmont grabbing every Indian they could get. And most people don't realize that it wasn't disease that destroyed the Native Americans, it was slaving. They were sold down into the cane fields in the Caribbean, and just to get them out of here. And that went on. The only thing that irritates me about the 1619 project is that slaving Indians started before slaving Africans, and it went on long after slaving Africans was against the law. We didn't quit selling Indians down into the copper mines in Mexico until the 1880s. So that's what happened to our Native American people. The disease did take some, but slaving took the rest. And the Occaneechis say that they survived because their Quaker friends sheltered them after the Tuscarora War, that they were sheltered by their Quaker friends. And they stayed close to their Quaker friends who sheltered them even after the Revolution. They did not leave North Carolina except with their Quaker friends. And the Quakers at the end of the Revolutionary War had to make a choice. You could either pay taxes to a slave state or and mitigate slavery one way or another, or you had to leave. And the mitigation method in North Carolina was that every meeting pledged a certain number of slaves, and they would go out and they would buy them, and they would train them to survive in the economy, and then they would manumit them, which is say release them from slavery. So in 1824, North Carolina's brilliant legislature did something equivalent to the bathroom law. They outlawed manumission. And so the Quakers had to leave. And they went up to Indiana and Ohio, and the Native American tenants went with them. And that is the story that the Occaneechi have in their oral history, is why they ended up in Indiana and Ohio until after the Civil War. As soon as the Civil War was over, they came back down here. Or at least some significant percentage of them.
It's fascinating to see how these puzzle pieces fit together. And I believe that this is only supposed to run until about 12:45 or so, but we do have 2 more questions. And actually, I'm curious to know the answers to these as well. The first is, do you have any idea how much of the road in North Carolina is still visible? And I think I already know the answer to that.
I think that it's safe to say at least 10%. And thank goodness for the development of LIDAR. When I first started this project, I would take topographical maps and I would presume the location of fords. And there were certain earmarks on the maps that indicated there might have been an old road there. And then I'd go out and I would ground truth the maps. And that was the way I was finding old roads in the beginning. And then in the 80s or early 90s, LIDAR became available. And LIDAR is a laser light splashed on the ground and reflected back up to the plane that splashed it. And it can discern a 2-foot deflection in the surface of the earth underneath 80% leaf cover. So I can sit at my desk and follow the old roads right across the state.
It's like X-ray vision.
There's a lot of them. It's really fun. Mount Terza's got some wonderfully I haven't been up there in quite a while. Had some wonderfully preserved roads. I found a number of moccasin paths that didn't get wiped out. There's one over near Keith Feather's house. I'm trying to remember the Piney Mountain Church east of Hillsborough and south. So, and there's in Randolph County, I found a switchback trail climbing up a hogback to get up on Earnhardt Road. And it was still totally visible. And all the way from the bottom of the mountain to the top of that ridge, probably about 6 or 8 switchbacks going up that hill for porters. Just a porter trail. It was moccasin path. Moccasin paths tend to be about 6 to 8 inches wide and 4 to 6 inches deep. And they're packed so tight that nothing will grow in them, because the Native Americans discipline their children to walk heel and toe, to leave a minimum mark on the ground. Once again, if you watch your birds at the feeder, they're always popping their heads up looking around. They're very defensive. And Native Americans were the same way, very defensive. Europeans noticed that as they approached villages, people would run out and hide in the woods. And they got to the point where they realized it was their muskets that scared them. So they would discharge their muskets as they approached the village. And the natives knew that they had to reload. So they weren't there with a hostile intent. So that kind of nonverbal communication developed very quickly on the frontier. I don't know how I got there. Sorry.
It's fascinating. And this is actually a great question to close the session out. Is this map accessible online somewhere so people can do their own research and satisfy
yes, indeed. There are a number of different versions of this map out there. And all you really need to do is search Edward Mosley 1733, and you'll get enough links to amuse yourself for a month of Sundays.
Fantastic. Well, that's good to know. And so I want to thank everybody for being here, and thank you, Tom Magnuson, again. And he did mention that he had a series of talks that he's done with us here at the museum. Now, 2 of those talks have already happened, and if you're interested in watching them, we do have recordings of them available on our YouTube channel. You can just search Orange County Historical Museum on YouTube, or you can visit our website and it'll take you there. His 3rd talk, which is happening next week, is actually completely full. I'm so incredibly sorry. It's a fantastic series. It is full, but that will be recorded and in turn uploaded to our YouTube channel. Thank you, Tom, for letting us record these and make them available to everybody. So just check the Orange County Historical Museum YouTube for these recordings. His 4th talk is happening in October, and the link to sign up for that should be coming out in the next couple weeks, so watch our website. And on behalf of the Orange County Historical Museum and the Alliance for Historic Hillsborough, thank you to everybody joining us for this Lunch and Learn, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you for facilitating this, Tanya. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. See everybody later.
Bye-bye.